Hi, this is David Heine, Aspect Art. Today we're in the Tropen Museum for their new show on batik. Now, batik is a kind of material that we're all more or less familiar with. It's something that is ancient and modern, both at the same time. It's a technique using wax and dye to make a multitude of design on material. Now, this exhibition goes into the history of it, the influence on the world that wears batik, and the European connection. So join us now at the Tropen Museum for batik. We're here today in the Tropen Museum for the beginning of a new exhibition on batik. Could you tell us a little about the inception of the exhibition and what it's about?
Well, the point we started with was, of course, the collection. The Tropen Museum owns a great collection of Indonesian textiles, and part of this collection is, of course, the collection of batik textiles. A few years ago, we bought a major collection. We already had a beautiful collection of batik, but then we bought an extra one, which made the collection complete, more or less complete. You're never complete, but this was a very good addition. And that was the moment we decided to make an exhibition on batik. So we took the collection as our starting point, and then I started to study and to go through all the 3,000 batik textiles. And then when you study them, then the subjects for your exhibition just come rolling out, and that's what happened.
Well, batik almost seems timeless. All of us have wore it at one point or another, or are certainly familiar with it. Could you give us a little history about batik and tell us its origins?
Well, batik is a resist dye technique, which is very old. You can find it in several places in the world, but only in Indonesia it came to this superb creations, this fineness of the work, and you see it in Africa and in Japan and all kinds of places, but only in Indonesia it became very important. It started in Indonesia already a long time ago. We don't know exactly where it came from, probably from China, and it was a kind of a rough technique first, and only in the beginning of the 17th century the chanting, the fine wax pen, was invented, and later on when the fine cotton was imported from Holland, then the beautiful textiles as we have them here now in the exhibition were made.
Now, the method or the technique of creating batik, maybe you could give us a little on that. You said canting?
Chanting.
Chanting. So tell us a little about that.
Well, the chanting is a little wax pen. It has a copper vessel and a bamboo handle. And the lady who does the batik, she takes a little of the warm fluid wax. She puts it into the chanting, and then she draws her figures, her motifs on the cloth. The cloth most of the time is cotton, and then you have the motifs in wax on the cotton. They apply the wax at both sides, so you have a perfect drawing on both sides. And then when the first drawing is ready, you put the cloth into a dye bath. So when you take, for instance, a red dye bath, then the places where the wax is will not be dyed, so they stay white. When you remove the wax, then you have white figures on a red background. This procedure you can rehearse often, and then you have a multicolored textile at the end. So in a way it's very simple, but it is very complicated also, because when you look at the textiles you hardly can imagine how incredible difficult this must be.
Now, speaking of that, there are lots of different styles in batik. Could you tell us a little about the varying styles that have developed out of this? It seems timeless, but in fact there must be a progression of styles or different forms that it's taken.
Yes, in the course of the 18th century, of course, Java was a trade route island. All the traders came along Java, and they settled sometimes. The Chinese settled there. The Arab traders came traded their materials to India, and then they came to Indonesia. And in the colonial time, then Europeans came, the Dutch mostly. So they all settled in Java, and they married to Javanese women. And then these various groups of for instance, Indo-Chinese, the Indo-Arab, and the Indo-European people emerged, and Java became a kind of a multi-ethnic society. Because clothing everywhere in every society is a medium to show your identity. Also, these different groups showed their identity by means of batik. So these groups all developed their own style. We have a Chinese style, we have the Indo-European style, and the style influenced by the Islam, and of course the styles from Java itself, which were influenced by the Hindu Buddhism.
Now, I notice as I look around in the exhibition that there was a strong influence on the Dutch artists at the turn of the century. Could you tell us something about that?
Yeah, there was, at the end of the 19th century, there was the arts and crafts movement of William Morris in England. And this was a kind of protest against mass production of things used in the houses. So they, I'm sorry. They started to look around, the artists, they started to look around for new techniques they could use. And because the Netherlands were so much involved with Indonesia or with the Dutch East Indies in those days, the Dutch artists looked to the east, to Java. And they saw the batik technique as a great inspiration to make their own beautiful works of art. So we have, in this exhibition, we have quite some famous artists, beautiful pieces of them hanging here.
Now, in the exhibition, you've arranged it in a kind of particular way. Could you talk a little about this beautiful arrangement of your exhibition?
Yeah, when the museum started the discussion with Joa, the architect, I had my portfolio with me with all the beautiful pictures and so on of the textiles. And I told him about these 4 styles we just were talking about. And then he saw one of the famous motifs from the Javanese courts in central Java. And he saw it, and it consists of 4 shapes, and it's the kawung motif. And when he saw it, he said, "This is it. I make the exhibition in the shape of this kawung motif." And I think it came out greatly.
Now, in your exhibition, you've put a lot of historical photographs of varying uses of batik. I notice in most of them there's a male and a female, both wearing batik. Was there a difference in the style between what males and females wore, or how they wore them?
Well, there were definitely sarongs only female wore, but initially I don't think so. There was a difference. For instance, in central Java, men and women were the same, but on the north coast I think it's different. And also, I think men, like the Indo-European men, and sometimes even the Chinese, they were also the chelana, and these were the trousers made out of a batik. So they didn't wear it as a sarong or a kain panjang, but as trousers made out of a batik cloth.
Now, oftentimes, certain kinds of... we lived in India for a period of time, and a certain group, the Muslims, wore a certain kind of mundu, they called them there. And the Hindus wore another one. Yeah. They were secular, but at the same time had religious connotations. Was this at all true in Java?
I think so, yes. Definitely, of course, the Javanese batik, they all have motifs on it which refer to Hindu-Buddhist ideas, to the cosmos, to the harmony in life, harmony in everything. And also the Chinese, they have lots of motifs on their batiks, like the bat, which is like bringing the phoenix, the bird, which only shows up when you need luck, and all kinds of things. So there are a lot of religious connotations on the batiks, yes.
And in the exhibition I saw that in the European influence that they did something to do, it looked like fairy tales or something. What was that about?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting thing happening around 1860, when Indo-European batik entrepreneurs, they took the batik technique as a medium to express all kinds of ideas. They took fairy tales as their inspiration, or even epics from from India. They had the Lombok War. We have so many of those batiks, so I thought I make a separate part of the exhibition because this is so interesting. These women found out how to express their feelings about things, about Holland, about things happening politically, and so on. And because I think this is so interesting, I ordered for this exhibition to continue this tradition of having batiks with all kinds of inscriptions. I ordered a batik last September in Cirebon, and they made there a batik with the title of the exhibition on it. So we have now all these batiks with all kinds of titles and things, and we also have one from 2001.
Now, batik has spread throughout the world. In fact, one of your sections in the exhibition indicates all the places it went. It even went as far as Africa. Now, is there a variation in style and color from country to country, or do they follow a general pattern?
No, there is no similarity almost at all. They are extremely different all. You immediately, when you know a little bit about, you immediately see when it is a batik from Africa, because they are so completely different, or from Japan, or no, you can see it immediately.
In the exhibition, there's a multitude of different colors. Are colors important? And I know that in 17th century Holland, for example, dyeing was an art, or considered such, and there were even people, the syndics, that would judge how well it had been dyed. Was that a problem? Was color and dyeing a problem with batik?
Well, when you talk about dyeing and batik, then you have to make a distinction between the batiks of Central Java and the batiks made at the north coast of Java, because these two areas are made completely different batiks. In Central Java, they mostly used natural dyes like Mengkudu red and indigo blue. So you have from Central Java the blue and dark red, brown. And the soga brown, of course. The soga brown, I mean, in Central Java. At the north coast, you have much more brighter colors. Like, I made a mistake, like the Mengkudu red, and also the blue, of course. But for instance, these Indo-European batik entrepreneurs, they experimented a lot. And for instance, one of the most famous batik entrepreneurs, Carolina van Frankemont, she was able to develop a color-fast, beautiful green, and it was quite new in those days. And then at the end of the 19th century, then they started to use also the synthetic dyes, and then everything changed. But I think they are going back again a little bit. I was there in January and September, and they start using the natural dyes again.
Well, today is the beginning of the exhibition. How long will the exhibition be here, and could you tell us a little about when the people could come and see it, and how long it'll be here?
Well, the exhibition is open for the public from April 11th until October 14th, and we open every morning at 10 o'clock. We close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, also in the weekend, so it's every day the same. And I would like to tell also that we have a workshop on Saturdays and Sundays, so people can come here and have the chanting, take the chanting themselves and try it. And that's a wonderful idea, because then you see how difficult it is, and how wonderful it is what these batik ladies accomplished in their batiks.
Lady, thank you very much. It's a stunning exhibition, and I like the music a lot too. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Today we're in the Tropen Museum. It's the opening of a big batik exhibition. Tell us about the design.
Well, it was very difficult actually to make a design in this big light hall, but it is also very challenging to do so. And we were using one of the patterns as the inspiration for the floor plan of the exhibition. It was also very important to avoid a lot of light which is coming into the light hall. So there was a special construction made, which we can use also in the future, so that we eliminate too much daylight. The other thing was that, of course, the lighting was very tricky. As these textiles are very sensitive, we had to use glass fiber optics. And with this new way of lighting, we could create a very equal and very natural light on all the textiles, which are huge also in measurements. And as you look at them, you will also see that we have the light coming from the top, and we have them also coming from downneath, because you have to illuminate these textiles from both sides then, because it doesn't reach too far. So you have to be very careful with it.
Now, I think that with the fiber optic that you're using, it's also economical. Could you tell us a little why that is?
Yes, the fiber optics, as they say also, they are made of fiber optics. And they have a very, very big speed for the light, which is running through this fiber optic. And so we have one light source where we have the bulb, and that is, let's say, for about 20 to 25, sometimes more outlets. We have just one light source, so you have very little energy for maximum lighting effect.
Well, Jova, it's a beautiful exhibition, and
Thank you.
Wish you the best of success. Seems like you've got a lot of nice new innovations in this one.
Yes, absolutely. It is also not the first exhibition in the Tropenmuseum that I made. The first one was Indigo, which was a very big success, and I hope very much that this exhibition will be again a big success.
I'm sure it will. Thanks.
Thank you too.
Hello, this is David Heine, Aspect Art. Today we're in the Scheepvaart Museum for an exhibition about heroes. What heroes? It's a sort of way of looking at heroism, hero worship, whether it exists here in Holland and what form it takes, actually. So join us now at the Scheepvaart Museum for Heroes, What Heroes? Thank you. Good morning, Willem. We're here at the Scheepvaart Museum and we're standing near the exhibition on Heroes, What Heroes? Could you tell us a little about what this exhibition conveys?
Well, it's about heroism, obviously, maritime heroism, and especially about what did it mean, what was it? I mean, we all have our heroes in every era, every time. For the Dutch in the 17th century, admirals, seafarers were heroes. But you only know them, we only know them from paintings, from prizes, from beautiful objects. But after all, a hero becomes a hero when he's dead, at least usually. So what we're trying to do here is to explain to the public that it was really, the people had to die first, that death was a very important aspect in this heroism. And then after that we try to explain to our public, I can't help it. After that we try to explain to the public what war at sea was all about, all the aspects of war. What could you use the Navy for? To escort convoys, which is very boring. A Navy can serve as a place where you can have a career, where you can make money, where you can earn medals on your breast. Navy, naval ships stimulate inventions, helping mankind forward with all sorts of things. It's like more or less like space, what was done in space research. Well, that's what we're trying to explain in this exhibition. What is behind the heroism.
Now you've chosen here in the opening part of the exhibition certain Dutch heroes that probably everybody knows their name. Could you tell us a little about each of them and why they're significant and why you've chosen them?
Yes, well, the eldest two are Maarten Herpertsson Tromp and Michiel de Ruiter. They are probably the most famous, and if you probably look at it with hindsight, de Ruiter is most likely the only one who will survive as a hero, being a real hero in the end. Piet Hein, he became a hero because he captured the Silver Fleet, Spanish Silver Fleet. It was a huge sum of money and bringing forth a huge dividend for the West India Company for which he sailed. He was a money hero, really. Then we have Zoutman, who was a hero at the end of the 18th century in a war against what we call the Fifth Anglo-Dutch War, which wasn't very heroic period. There wasn't very much heroism in Holland at that time, and Zoutman didn't really win the sea battle against the English, the Battle of the Doggerbank, but at least he brought it to a head. I mean, it was indecisive, and because there wasn't very much heroism in the country at that time, he was regarded as, he became more or less automatically a hero. Then we have Van Speyk in the early 19th century. The Dutch had been humiliated by the Belgians separating from our country. And what did Van Speyk do? He was on the River Scheldt, anchored there, and the anchor started dragging, and the ship went into the coast into the riverside of the Scheldt, and boarded by the Belgians, and he blew up a ship, which was at that time regarded as an enormous deed of heroism, which in fact, of course, well, you would say he was rather crazy, I suppose. And then finally Karel Doorman, the admiral in the Second World War, who led the battle in the Java Sea against the Japanese, who were invading Indonesia at that time. And he didn't really want to go into that battle. He realized that the Japanese were going to be stronger, they were going to invade anyway, and he was far more wanted to take the fleet and withdraw to Australia and strengthen and then come back and try and defeat the Japanese. And of course the battle in the Java Sea was a disaster. I mean, the fleet was destroyed almost completely, and Karel Doorman died and never knew that he became a very big hero after that.
Now, you've gone on to point out that in Holland there is a slightly different rendering of hero worship than, let's say, England, where Lord Nelson has an entire square. Could you tell us a little of the anecdotal Dutch concept of hero honoring?
Well, the Dutch, as you probably well know, do not like heroism. They don't like heroes. People are in this country are supposed to be as normal as they can be, and everyone who is a little more than that is not accepted very much in this country. That's the reason that heroism isn't very popular here. Nevertheless, we see that some people stick out in this, and we have a few of them here in this exhibit. I think that's the main difference between the Brits. They really, really like their heroes and worship them. I mean, Trafalgar Square with Nelson there. There's no such equivalent of de Ruyter in this country, where he was absolutely as much a hero as Nelson was.
I seem to recall that they actually made a statue out of cast iron as opposed to bronze or anything.
Yes, well, yes, not only that, they made de Ruyter has a cast iron statue in Flushing. They couldn't afford stone or bronze. They obviously didn't want to have it in Amsterdam, and it wasn't built there in the 17th century after de Ruyter died, but it was built there in the 19th century when we had the revival of nationalism. During this period when Dutch became a nation, a kingdom, 300 years after, over 200 years after de Ruyter died.
Now, you spoke earlier of the conditions of war that might be experienced. Now, when I look at some of these paintings, it looks terribly confusing what's going on, and a whole lot of people swimming in the water. It looks devastating. What was the life like of a sailor on a man-of-war?
Well, talking about the 17th century, I think it must have been pretty awful. We have descriptions. I mean, the boats were very small, and they had up to 200-300 people on a ship, and living in very, very cramped and terrible conditions, and with a big certainty that they were not going to get back home. That must have been quite horrible to live there. But then, of course, I mean, you had to make money. You went out there, you went to sea because you got paid, you got money, you could send it to your wife or your children. It was a means of living, as it is today. I mean, the conditions today are far better, but once the war starts and you're going to battle, there's no knowing if you're going to get out of it alive. That hasn't changed.
Now, I know that from some of my readings about the VOC that the Navy was often deployed to battle those privateers that were always trying to intercept the VOC. Was this a dangerous area? I think Piet Hein, in fact, met his demise in this area.
I think I'm not sure quite where that was, but one of the tasks of the Dutch Admiralty ships was to sail out into the English Channel and beyond that to the coast of North America to protect incoming and outgoing convoys of VOC ships against pirates, Dunkirk pirates, the Barbary pirates. That was an important task of naval ships, because the naval ships in the 18th century, or before the 19th century I should say, did not go to Asia. Indonesia was a private enterprise of the VOC, and warships stayed here. They had their own armament to defend their trade in Indonesia, the VOC, but not state-run navies or warships.
Now, in your exhibition, you've sought to ask some questions about heroism. What have you come to as a conclusion in this exhibition, or what are some of the ideas that you've sought to illuminate?
Well, what we hoped to accomplish is that when people come out of the exhibition, that it makes them think about heroism. Makes them think about what heroes really were. They were people who got themselves killed in doing their work, basically. And when you go into the third part of the exhibition, where we show what was actually going on in the Navy through 4 centuries, you see that it is sometimes exciting, sometimes it's extremely boring, sometimes it's inventiveness, which makes it interesting. And that's what we like that's what we like people to realize, that it's not all gold and glitter and glory.
I remember one of the big highlight moments for the Dutch Navy was when they sailed up the Thames River.
That way.
What exactly was that about?
That was it was decided that there were peace negotiations between the Dutch and the English, and it wasn't getting along. The English were stopping it, and they were not acting on politically. So it was decided that a Dutch fleet would sail up the Medway up to Chatham and Rochester and destroy part of the English fleet, and that's what happened. And this was the first territorial breaking of English territory since William the Conqueror in 1066. The first time foreigners came in and almost onto the land. They took the ships and put the castle on fire and put ships on fire. And this, of course, caused enormous panic in England. The English thought there was going to be an invasion, and they got really very worried. And the peace was signed within a month. It was using the navy as a break iron to force the English to come to peace with the Dutch.
Now, sometimes people forget that Holland in the 17th century perhaps represented the strongest navy on earth. Was there the same kind of sort of idea of keeping your head down and not getting it chopped off in those days, or was there a little bit more arrogance among the Dutch merchants and the navy at that time?
I don't think so. I think it was still. I think basically it was the same sort of stuff. You don't get involved. You don't want war. I don't think they wanted war. It wasn't in the interest of merchants to have war. It cost money. Fighting cost money. Only in the extreme situation that there was no other way out would they choose to invest in men of war and fight and go out and fight. I think it's basically was the same sort of Calvinistic view of things. You be plain, normal, do your work, and don't spend money on things you don't need.
I think the De Witt brothers actually lost their lives because they didn't do that.
Yeah, there was also a conflict between the Oranges and but it's sort of something to do with that. Yes.
Well, Willem, thank you very much for explaining this exhibition, and I think people should get out to have a look about the Dutch history here and the maritime point of view.
I certainly hope they'll come. I think they'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Hi, this is David Heine, Aspect Art. Today we're in Leiden at the Lachenhall. We're here for a very special show. The paintings have all been taken from a single collection in Dresden. They're the fijnschilders. Now, this was a group of painters that commanded the highest prices, the largest rates, for very small cabinet paintings. They went all over Europe to the heads of the state primarily, who were just about the only people that could actually afford them. Here, today in the Lachenhall is a collection all coming from a single family. He was at one point the king of Poland. He was actually the elector of Saxony, Augustus. This is his son up above me, who in fact lost the Polish crown, but kept the collection together. So join us now for Fijnschilders in Leiden. Thank you. Christian, we're here today in the Lachenhall. It's a beautiful place. First time that we've made an aspect art here. You've got a fine new show that comes from Germany. Could you tell us a little about it?
Yeah, it's a collection of Leiden fijnschilders. Fijnschilders is a name used for a group of Leiden painters in the 17th century who were, even at that stage, very well known for their very fine technique. This collection comes from Dresden, in Saxony, in Germany, and it's the first time that it is on display here in Leiden or in Holland.
Now, these painters were unique in their time. Now, I think one of them, the leader or the first of them, was Gerard Douw, who is now also featured in an exhibition. He studied with Rembrandt, but his style doesn't seem to be at all like Rembrandt's. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, Rembrandt, of course, is very well known for his very rough technique, his very loose handling of paint, while Douw, his first pupil here in Leiden, took totally the opposite side, a very smooth technique. You can't see any trace of paint of his technique. It's so smooth, it's so fine, very contrary to Rembrandt's. But Rembrandt, to be honest, when he was still here in Leiden, also used this kind of technique. And Douw must have seen it from his master. It was only when Rembrandt moved to Amsterdam that he loosened up his technique and that he developed this other technical way of handling paint.
Now, as I look around in the exhibition, the majority of the paintings are quite small. Is this particular to the Fijnschilders?
Yes, they are cabinet pieces. Because of this very fine technique, you can paint this way, especially on very smooth surfaces, on wood, not on canvas, and small pieces where you can really see the small details for which they were very well known at that stage. They were so expensive at the time, so you can make small paintings. They were very expensive, but they really were for collectors, for small cabinets. Really big paintings in this technique, it wouldn't work very well.
Now, speaking of collectors, all of these paintings come from a single collection. How did they get there in the first place, and who was the collector of these?
Well, it started with a kind of a madness. It was the Elector of Saxony, August the Strong, who was a great collector of Italian paintings, Rembrandt paintings, Vermeer paintings, porcelain. But he had really one ambition, is to build a big collection of Leiden Fijnschilders. And he reassembled more than 80 paintings in the 18th century. Gerard Douw, Frans van Mieris, Gabriel Metsu. He sent his ambassadors over the whole of Europe to Antwerp and Amsterdam to look for these paintings, and that's how they got in Saxony, in Dresden.
Now, I noticed all of the paintings are framed in a certain unique manner, and they're covered with glass, which seems to be either a modern conservation method or but then I see little hinges and actual locks. What's the story on this?
The son of this elector, August III, he changed the whole collection. All the paintings, the frames of all the paintings were taken off, and he added a new kind of frame, a rococo frame. And with the Leiden Fijnschilders, because they were so very precious and valuable, they made the small doors with this glass panes, which you can see today. To my amazement, when I went to Dresden for the first time, I saw these paintings. I thought it was modern glass, but they indeed are 200 years old. And the idea at that stage was not only protection. I think probably the king, because he was king of Poland too, he would, when there was an important visitor, he would see the paintings, show them to their visitors, open the door, and allow them to have a look at the painting, then close the door again, which I think is very clever, because this increases the value of these paintings.
Now, fijnschilders implies that they worked in a very fine and detailed methodology. What was the subject matter primarily, or was that even relevant?
Yes, for now a long time people thought that they were the best painters of everyday life. You see women at work, or an interior where people drink, scholars at work. And now it seems that these themes or subjects they were repeated over and over, and they probably have a more deeper meaning. They allude to the position of women as a virtuous element in society, or scholars remind you of the end of life, of vanity of life. So they have a deeper meaning. With the later fijnschilders, especially with Gerrit Douw, you see that he developed a few subjects which were taken over by his pupils, by Frans van Mieris and Gabriel Metsu.
One of the things that I've read was that their technique or their handling, now we're here in the Lachenhal, which is where they used to have material, and
Yes.
they used to make textiles and whatnot here. Or am I mistaken, weren't the fijnschilders also known for their handling of material or textiles?
Yes, very much so. If you have a look at the painting of either Gerrit Douw or Frans van Mieris, Willem van Mieris, you see their ability to depict all kinds of different materials, and especially textiles. And they were collected at that time not only by international collectors as kings or important other persons, but also here in Leiden. Leiden at that stage was very, very, economically speaking, very prosperous. Quite a few of these collectors were barons or industrials of the textile industry. They must have appreciated these paintings, especially because of the ability to see all these textiles, embroidery or silks. That probably has to do with the Leiden background, I'd say, yeah.
Now, did this school of painting flourish for longer than the 17th century, or was it just indigenous to that particular time frame? And were there followers?
Yes, there were followers. Well, there were already in the 17th century the best paid, the best valued painters here in Holland, in the Republic of Holland. And this remained so in the 18th century. Gerrit Douw, for example, you couldn't build up an important collection without having a Gerrit Douw in your collection. And this remained so until the early 19th century. In France or Stockholm, London, everywhere you can find fijnschilder paintings in all royal collections or important collections. But in the 19th century, this has changed a lot. As we all know, Rembrandt, for example, became one of the most important painters. He was very appreciated in the 19th century as our national painter. And remarkably so that the fijnschilders and their renown decreased immediately in the 19th century. The gallery is opened every day except on Monday. The show is until the 23rd of April, just after Easter, and it's pretty close to the railway station. And Leiden, I guess everybody will find it.
Kristen, very, very nice to speak with you this morning, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. good. She's an example. For example, as you would see in Kat's pieces, men are either an example of bad behavior or good behavior. There's always a kind of a moral warning. Indeed, that one doesn't exclude the other. I would say they have both sides in them.
Now, this is a movement of painters that, can we say that it was exclusive to Leiden, or